When looking at his work, you can see that Hideo Kojima and Shigeru Murata are no strangers when it comes to strange plots and complicated timelines. That, together with the beautiful designs that Yoshishikawa created for the Son of the Enders franchise, you can kinda see why this franchise turned into a cult hit. Being a Zoe fan and seeing there are no videos about the Zoe universe in depth, I decided to create my own. This will use mostly official material distributed by Konami, since I plan on creating my own video talking about possible theories for Zone of the Enders 3. That being said, let's get this video started. In the year 2014, Earth started having problems regarding population, energy and environment. In the same year, the International Transport Concept is announced. In 2020, the fervor for space exploration is reignited as a result of the completion of the first lunar foothold. 2 years after that, the L-1 Mars Catcher Outpost construction was completed, and the Lunar Mars Driver was first used. 2027, humanity successfully launches an Archer satellite into orbit. Construction on the orbital transport begins. In the next few years, the international project Mars colonization concept would be made public, together with the discovery of a flat land on the Jupiter moon Callisto, further sparks interest in space travel. 2045, the orbital transport project is completed, and with that, humanity is propelled into a full-scale space age. The Reading Universal technology precipitates space development projects with the first generation lab. With that, humanity could easily mine in lunar resources excavation facilities. 3 years later, the construction of the L4 and L5 space colonies begins. Finally, in the year 2052, terraforming on Mars begins. That also comes with the early foundation of Bahram. Worldwide generation of nuclear fusion is given its first priority. 11 years later, the United Nations announces that fossil fuel has dried up. In 2067, Metatron, the main resource used in the Zoe universe, is found on Callisto, in one of Jupiter's moons. A few years later, immigration starts for the colonies on L4 and L5. With the fast development at last phase, they can now be used for working on zero-G. In the next following years, humanity constructs permanent footholds on the Martian moons Phobos and Deimos. Together with the use of Metatron for electric purposes, revolutionizes the industry. In the next years, humanity will discover spatial compressing phenomena of Metatron, together with the application of the Uranbed catapult that made traveling to the solar system a relatively easy and quick task. In the year 2111, marked the construction of the permanent foothold Antillia is begun on the Jupiter moon Europa L5. Terraforming would only be completed in 2130, shortly after a bacterial disaster would put the whole Earth block in quarantine. And in the following years, Antillia would be fully colonized. The Discord that would mark the beginning of the series' main theme begins when Earth starts making xenophobe and racist comments about people who lived on Mars, as there was social and political problems. With that, the people on Mars started being called by the slur Enders. After all of the xenophobic and racist comments received by Earth, Bahram rebels against the UNSF, allegedly seeking the independence of Mars. However, the truth about Bahram is much darker than initially revealed, seeking full dominance rather than liberance, committing war crimes, killing civilians along the way, committing non-ethical experiments with Metatron, and leaving a trail of destruction and madness where it stands. Interestingly enough, the name Bahram comes from the word who appears to be based off the Persian language, named from Mars. Bahram, as a name, can also mean smiting of resistance or victorious in the same language. Together with Nut, they start working on the very first orbital frame prototype, Idolo. Spoiler warning! If you didn't play the games or watch the movie or never watched the TV show and are planning to doing that in the future, I recommend you closing this video, since now I will delve into the movies and games. You have been warned. So let's talk about the first movie, Idolo. In Idolo, we have a sense of the size of this world, the conflicts, the people who only want to live in peace, the tension between factions, and the side effects that a war between planets would cause, and most importantly, the effects of war and what a new technology can cause on the human mind. We see the story of Levance and his soon-to-be wife Dolores being included in the creation of this giant steel and Metatron monster that will soon ruin their lives due to Metatron poisoning. Zone of the Enders Idolo really shows in how subtle writing works for the series, as well as working for the prequel for the main game. In the end of the movie, we see something that will become very common on the Zone of the Enders franchise, references to Evangelion, with Levance being unable to cope with Dolores' death and being manipulated by Metatron. The situation ends up being very reminiscent of the one that Gendo had in Evangelion, once again sending him into a maniacal crusade against Earth in the TV series Zone of the Enders Dolores. Shortly after the end of the movie, after Idolo is destroyed, Radium was put into treatment, and the wreckage of Idolo was later salvaged by Bahram for the production of the orbital frames Isis and Hathor. I would like to add the story of Idolo is really interesting, since in the old Egyptian mythology, Osiris was quartered into 16 parts. A similar event happened in Zone of the Enders when, like I said, Idolo gets destroyed. This orbital frame was the strongest of them all, and the first one to be manufactured, taking whole squads in minutes. The whole frame was made of Metatron, so after its destruction, Bahram used its components to make other orbital frames. The coincidences would end here, but the name that they gave to the orbital frames pretty much gives this away, being Isis and Hathor, which has the phrase System Osiris imprinted on its forehead. When I was young, I always assumed Zone of the Enders was 100% based off the Egyptian mythos, because the tendency the game has to name every orbital frame after an Egyptian god, as well as enemies. But that doesn't seem to be the case. Zone of the Enders seems to be a fusion between Greek and Egyptian mythologies. The birth of Aphrodite, for example, consisting in the goddess being born when Kronos castrated his father, Uranus, with a sickle, and cast the genitalia into the sea, from where Aphrodite appeared amidst the resulting foam. That would also be in line with the position of the cockpits being located near the genital area. Another good observation is that Lloyd, the pilot of Inherits, doesn't have the cockpit near his genital area, since he's past his reproduction phase, being an elder, which should further lend credit to this theory. The whole fuselage was turned into countless orbital frames, and in the original story, Seth quartered Osiris and scattered his body all over Egypt, and that also happens on Zone of the Enders, since the orbital frame technology ends up on the UNSF Force hands, Earth, and in the original myth, Isis finds all the pieces of Osiris and revives him. That can also be seen on Zone of the Enders when Isis defeats Osiris. Since the Zone of the Enders storyline is loosely based around the Egyptian and Greek mythology, like Evangelion inspired by Judaism, I wonder what could happen in a future game. We never got to see Seth, Horus in their orbital frame version, so I think it could be very interesting. Since Zone of the Enders is basically Hideo Kojima version of Eva and Gundam, it's interesting to see how Zoe deals with parallel themes connected to Evangelion and even Gundam. Eva deals with motherhood, while Zone of the Enders deals with fatherhood. Eva deals with Judaism, while Zone of the Enders deals with Egyptian and Greek myths. But alright, let's go back to the timeline and finish this thing. In the year 2168, the protagonist from the second game, Dingo, was delivering Metatron when he has an encounter with Noman, one of the leaders of Bahram, that generates an immense conflict, and Dingo is apparently the only one to survive, but manages to get it delivered to its destination. And that cargo is later used to build the orbital frames Jehuti and Anubis on the space colony Antilia. Dingo hides on Callisto as an in the year 2172, this is the year that Zone of the Enders Dolores takes place, following the story of James Lynx and his family, when Dr. Lynx sent him the orbital frame Dolores. After the Antilia raid, Bahram, under General Roger Yusha, together with Radium, mobilizes to seize control of the Earth orbital elevator and make it crash into the Earth, causing a catastrophe that could have killed millions. These plans do not go like they had planned, however, because both ended up being defeated by Dolores. After that, Dolores uses her space distortion programs to make the elevator stable again, sacrificing herself for the greater good. Dolores would mysteriously return in the last episode with a new body. In the same year, the UNSF occupies Antillia through force, with Baron launching a full-scale attack in December. Baron successfully defeats the UNSF and takes Anubis, but loses Jehuti to a coincidental pilot and colony resident Leo Stanback. Jehuti is subsequently taken on board of the Atlantis. In January 18 of the next year, Leo Stanback, the protagonist from the first game, is promoted into the UNSF as a Special Task Corporeal and begins training alongside Hawk Thunderheart. He has gifted a lad named Vic Viper at the end of his training. While this happens, Baron inflates sentiments of Martian independence by playing upon base activities. In the year 2174, Dingo Egbert stumbles upon Jehuti and faces off against Baron, together with Ken and Leo. Project Alman is activated by Noman, but Dingo manages to defeat and kill him. Through the ensuing explosion activates anyway, Dingo efforts to keep the damage to a minimum, and the explosion ends up only destroying Phobos. And with that, Mars subsequently gains independence from Earth. And that is the end of the current Zoe timeline. You might have noticed that I excluded a great part of the events from the game vs. Mars. It was a tactical RPG set in the Zoe universe, released exclusively to the Game Boy Advance. However, it was not created by KGP, nor it was included in the HD collection. It was created by the gaming division of Sunrise, the same company that made the TV show and animes for the series. The game features a decision system, which greatly influences the outcome of the story, and that on itself creates problems into his canonicity status. It's our own version of the eternal debate that the Metal Gear community faced with portable ops, and its canonicity status. So I think that's it for the video. I hope to see you next time.